Hello friends, I'm starting a new piece of furniture today. It's going to be a small standing desk and I want to make a slightly more in-depth video series on this one. So in this first part I'm going to go through the design and also rough cut the components. I'm in the middle of redoing the layout of my shop and most things are in their place, but it's still rather messy, so it's going to look rather messy, but that's the way it is. So I haven't talked very much about my design process in previous videos, but I thought that might be fun to do a little bit. So when I was asked to draw up this small standing desk, I started by just looking at Google Images, what other people have done historically, and one type of standing desk that came up was sort of this thing. I think it's called a chevret, if you'll pardon my French. And that really is precisely my aesthetic. I would love to have that at my home sometime when I have more space, but it's not quite right for this project. So then I started just brainstorming a bunch of random ideas. Most of these are sort of crazy, but I like to get all the crazy stuff out of my head first, so that I then can sort of pull elements from that and refine without having all these bonkers concepts in my mind trying to get out. None of these were quite working for obvious reasons. Possibly like that one I felt was something to move forward with. So I started doing some similar variants up here, and then I began pulling down this leg just to see what would happen and turning it more into a sort of horizontal foot. This was starting to look rather nice, but it gave me a sort of school bench vibe, which I was not super into. I kept exploring this horizontal foot for a bit, but it just wasn't getting away from that school bench look. So I began pulling it back up along the back leg, starting to kind of like these two, and then I drew this one, and I knew that that's going to be my silhouette. So what I did here was basically to pull back some of those classic chevret style elements into this more maybe mid-century modern look. So then when I knew that that's something to go for, I tried out a few different variants, refined it a little bit, and arrived at this pair. These are the same from different angles, and I showed that to my customer, who said yes, that's what we want. By the way, the customer is family, so it's not a super high stakes, prestigious work, but I still want to make my customer happy. If I was making this for myself, honestly, I would have stopped somewhere here, figured out all the rest in my head. Because it's not for me, someone else is paying for the materials, I wanted to make sure that I really knew the direction to head in, and also to give a more precise drawing to the customer. So I made this one with the proportions drawn out. Here's a top view of the top. This is a view more for my own sake, for the internal frame that will hold a drawer underneath the top. And then very much for my own sake, some construction details about how the legs will join into the stretchers and so forth. And yeah, that's sort of the design process. So here's my materials. It's ash, about 50 millimeters thick, 270 millimeters wide or so, and both of these pieces were one board, 3 meters long. Being one board, I know that the grain and color is going to be a good match. And now I want to lay out the cuts that I'm going to make to get the components that I need. I immediately see that this section here is some fantastic stock for legs. They're going to end up 40 or 45 millimeters wide, so I'm going to lay out a cut at 50 millimeters here. And then I of course need the second leg. So question is if I take it from that side again, or if I now take it from this side. Got a bit tighter grain here, but over on the other end it's actually the other way around, so it's tighter here. I'm gonna do one more leg from the same side. Alright, and then I need 2 more legs. They're going to be shorter, but same thickness. The length of these legs are not as simple because they are at an angle. I know what height they need to reach, but being at an angle, that makes the length different. But I drew this drawing at a 10th scale, so I can just measure 83 millimeters, so it'll be 830 in real life. And by taking the legs from the outsides of the boards like this, you get growth rings that go sort of at a diagonal. What that does is you get straight grain on all 4 sides, rather than having straight grain on 2 sides and flats on cathedrals on 2, as you would get if you were to take a leg out of the center of a board. So that's my reasoning there. I'm not going to go through all the components because there's quite a few. So let's go over to some cutting now. Well, I didn't get very far with the circ saw. There is a lot of tension in these boards and they just pinched the blade immediately. So I set it to cut only half the way through and finished the cuts with hand saws. Interestingly, I'm reading Corbeau at the moment, L'Art du Menuisier, and when discussing wood species, all it says on ash is that it's not used much. I thought that was just down to the trends of its time, being all about dark, rich tropical colors, but maybe it was actually referring to a tendency for high tension and pinching. I haven't worked with ash enough to know if it's any more common there than with other species, and I can't find any comments about it online. Maybe it's just the board I got. Alright, that was an unexpected workout, but I think I have all the components that I need. I say all components, this is probably like 99% of them, because it's almost only ash, but I'm also going to use some secondary woods in the drawer. However, as much sawing as I have done, I'm not quite finished yet, as a few of these need to be resawn into thinner boards. Like this one, I'm going to make an internal frame that will carry the drawer, and it needs to be resawn. Let's see, growth rings are that way, so I want to resaw it into 4 pieces like so. And I also need to resaw these big chunks to make a book-matched top and lower shelf. I need to cut it that way, all the way down. Let's do it. Alright, let's talk for a moment about resawing these large pieces. This is going to be the tabletop. I gave myself a curve on each of the long edges with a circular saw. It's only about 20 millimeters deep, but that is going to be a very big help, both in guiding the saw and getting it started. So I have the piece rather upright on the vise right now. That means I can easily get a cut started both at the far and at the close edge here. So I'm going to start making a cut here, bring it down a little bit, and here, and try to make them meet. There, now I have a straight cut all the way across the end grain there, connecting my 2 curves, and I actually find that tipping the board a little bit towards me and cutting against the grain is a very efficient way of quickly getting rid of that corner and starting to bring my cut into the board. And I bring this first cut down to where I'm starting to reach my near corner. I have a cut that goes sort of like that. So if I start cutting in this direction now, I'm going to very quickly be able to get rid of that. And I keep going until I reach around this depth. By now it is fairly stuck in there from all the friction. But at this point I'm going to flip it around and start doing the same thing from the other end. And this time I'm going to cut deep enough that I can start putting in wedges to keep the curve open. Let's talk for a moment about body mechanics as well. Once you get the cut going and it mostly is steering itself, you can certainly keep doing it mostly with your arm. But I find that this just wears me out immediately. So what I do is I lower my body a little bit, I bend my legs, and this allows me to move my whole body backwards and forwards just using my legs. And the leg muscles are much larger and don't get exhausted as quickly. So you can keep up this type of motion for a much longer period. And what happens when you put your whole body into it like that is you barely have to extend your arm at all. I start the stroke with my hand right next to my body and I end it having extended it like 15 centimeters, and with my offhand placed on top of the handle. That is a motion I can keep going for a very long time. I've been sewing for almost 3 hours today, and I mean, I'm tired, but I'm not exhausted. I can definitely finish this piece without issue at all. I'm also combating the friction with a bit of sewing machine oil. I have this rag in a can, as Paul Sellers does it, and it's just saturated with sewing machine oil, so I can wipe down the plate periodically to keep the friction down. So these three things, the wedges, the oil, and dropping your body a little bit lower so that you can use your legs, that's what keeps me going. But even with all of those things, of course, this is very tiring work. So, you just have to take some breaks, have some water now and then, and keep going, and eventually you'll get through. Alright, so that's the entire board of ash, rough cut into all the components I'm going to need, apart from a pair of drawer sides and a drawer bottom, which are going to be secondary woods. We'll get to that later. But yeah, all the main parts for the desk are here. I have an internal frame that will hold the drawer. They will be assembled like so, and these are very stable quarter sawn pieces that were cut out of the center of the board in this orientation. I have a back rail that will connect the legs, and from this I also resawed a pair of thinner boards that will do the same thing but with a compartment in between them. I've got a drawer front and a front that will go below the lower shelf, a front rail. This one was cut from the edge so that I have fairly straight grain all the way around. This one, which is less critical in my opinion, I settled with cutting out of the center, but it will be cut at a diagonal, which should make this front look a little bit more interesting as well. 2 pairs of breadboard ends. 2 of these are going to sit on the tabletop on on the ends like so, and the other two are going to do the same thing on the lower shelf. These are resawn so that they will be book matched. I think it'll be a nice touch to have those mirrored breadboard ends. Got a pair of lower stretchers, same thing but upper, so the tabletop is going to sit across here. We have a book matched tabletop. This is going to look very, very pretty, I think. Probably that way, yeah, to get the cathedrals a little bit closer together. I think that will be nice. And the expansion and contraction of the top will go out the back and not affect the width of the table. Then we have the lower shelf, same idea as the top, but slightly less pretty grain pattern, and that's why these are gonna be the shelf and not the top. And finally we have 4 legs. With all 4 of these I tried to take them from the edges of the board. Really nice straight grain all the way around. I'm not gonna do a full episode of just planing everything, that even I realized that would be super boring. Instead I figure I'll make an episode about the construction of a certain section, and in each episode I'm going to plane up the parts that will be used in that section of the construction. So I hope to see you there. Bye.